Good morning, everybody. The name of this presentation is The New Normal for Learning, Health, and Misinformation. My name is Dr. Jerry Lynn Hogg, and I'm the director of the Media Psychology program here at Fielding Graduate University. I'd like to thank you for joining us this morning. And I'm very pleased to introduce this panel today. I expect it to be one of the best that we're offering. There's just so many great bits of information, research, ideas that are going to be presented today. We have three presentations on the panel. The first presentation is by Dr. Randy Kulman. He's the founder of LearningWorks for kids and will be speaking about programs to empower online learning during, and we hope there'll be an after, of COVID-19. LearningWorks Live and OUTSCHOOL. He is one of the smartest practicing psychologists I know that explores online learning, games, screens. I've been able to present on other panels with Dr. Coleman before, and I think it's a real honor to have you here. Thank you. Then following Dr. Coleman is Dr. Rupal Phillips. She is the founder and director of the Meadow of Hope Center for Emotional Wellness, and she's going to be speaking about two different items that are so relevant today. The first on telehealth, and then about the multicultural behaviors, and in particular in online psychological services. Are they effective as in-person location? I know that's a question we all want to know, and this is a critical question that we want to explore. So welcome. And finally, we have Dr. Wasim Ahmed. He is a lecturer at the Digital Business in the Department of Marketing, Operating and Systems at Newcastle University. He'll be speaking about social media as a mainstream critical component of our daily lives and the influence of COVID-19 on activity and usage. I'm really looking forward to his unique expertise in social computing to provide us with some deeper insight. So before we get started, I just want to talk a little bit about housekeeping. We will have a Q&A period after all of the formal presentations. And if you have questions along the way, feel free to put them in chat and we'll be collecting them. And then during the Q&A, you can use the chat for lifetime question and answer. We ask that you be respectful and refrain from any comments or actions that might be seen as bullying, discriminatory, harassment, or that display inappropriate content. Anyone not respecting this code of conduct will be removed from the meeting. We want this to be a really positive environment for all involved, so we want to thank you for your help and understanding here. And I'd like to give a special shout out to my PhD student, Elizabeth Murphy, who is providing behind the scenes backup for today's symposium. So now I'd like to turn this over to you, Dr. Coleman.
Thank you, Jerry Lynn. I will share my screen and kind of get started with this. I appreciate being here, and I think it's a unique opportunity to look at what we can do during COVID-19 and how we're going to go about working on helping kids get through this and be able to educate themselves. So let me share my screen properly. And there we go. All right, great. Terrific. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about some programs that can help with online learning. I spend much of my time as a clinical psychologist doing neuropsychological evaluations of kids, but my passion is on how to use technology for kids. And as a result of that, over the last 20 years, I've developed a website, LearningWorks for Kids, that is designed to help clinicians, parents, educators learn how to use technologies, particularly popular digital technologies, to help kids with executive functioning skills, working memory skills, social emotional learning skills as well. And in the last couple of months in doing my clinical work, one of the things that I found was that kids were not doing a great job with distance learning. And so I interviewed many kids, probably about 30 kids in my clinical practice. And what I heard was pretty remarkable. Perhaps the most interesting thing was how there were some kids who liked it because they just didn't have to do very much. They didn't learn very much, but they didn't have to do very much. That was oftentimes true for older kids. For example, I had a 16-year-old that I interviewed who reported that he liked it because he didn't have to wake up early. He's kind of a kid with some attention and some learning issues, didn't have to do much work, so school was great. On the other hand, you had kids who wanted to learn from school, and they didn't. They were saying that they were not learning. In Rhode Island, where I'm from, and by the way, you may hear my Rhode Island accent at some point. We have like 30 school districts in a state that's probably the size of Houston, Texas, and it depended on the school district. But many of the kids never really saw the teachers. What I found is that, particularly for kids, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, that kids with learning issues struggle more so than kids without that kind of thing. The data suggests that there's major class divides right now. There's a study done by Brown and Harvard of a math learning program that was online that they used in the schools. And what they found is if you were from a low-income zip code, there was a 50% decrease in what you learned. If you were from a middle-income zip code, a 35% decrease in what you learned. But if you were from a high-income zip code, there was no loss whatsoever. So there's some real class issues that are going on here. Some of this has to do with parental capacity, how much they can engage, whether they were working or not. For some of the kids that came from poorer families, they had less access to technology. Sometimes in a way that's unusual. They had to share the computer with their parents who were online. They only had one computer. So all those kinds of things were problematic. I also saw that it was most problematic for the youngest kids. That was very, very difficult. So in particular, I have a concern for kids with learning disabilities, attentional issues. That's kind of my focus. And these kids, by definition, just need more one-on-one help. They need small group help. They need to get feedback. They need to be getting direct teaching. These are the kids that need encouragement. They need to build grit, persistence. They need to build a growth mindset in order to do well. And these kids weren't getting that because the teachers just weren't there enough. Especially for many of the teachers, just didn't have any time to prepare. I don't blame teachers. I've talked to a lot of teachers who really felt blindsided. Well, we all were blindsided, but by what they needed to do, and they just didn't know how to do it. And one of the things that we heard from many of the teachers and from the parents of these kids who have learning and attentional problems is those problems were amplified. They were magnified by doing distance learning. These are the kids who need some help with task initiation, getting started. They need a teacher to preview what they're going to do. They need someone to help them stay organized. Some of the same kinds of things that just younger kids need in general. They also need to use other executive function skills, planning skills, time management skills. And this sort of led to us, LearningWorks for Kids really trying to build these kinds of programs that we've done. And we're doing this on a place called OUTSCHOOL, which I'll get to in a bit when I show you this, okay? So what's going to happen? Well, if you know, then you know more than anybody else, because none of us really know. What we're starting to hear now is, more and more schools are going to either be closed, just doing online learning, or doing some kind of hybrid model. For example, New York City now, I think, is going to be doing something where kids are going to be going to school 1 to 3 days a week, with a limit on the number of kids that they can have there. Many families are concerned about sending their kids to school. Some of the data that you see in the screen comes from OUTSCHOOL, where by definition, these parents like the idea of online learning. Many of these parents were homeschoolers to begin with. But if you look at some of the other data, a recent poll, this is just in July 10th to the 13th from Axios, found that 71% of parents see a large or moderate risk to the children's health in returning to school. So this uncertainty is there. What's going to happen? Parents don't know how they're going to do this. College is the same thing. What's going to happen in colleges? I was speaking with a student the other day who came in to see me, who's a student at Loyola University in Chicago. She's going to be doing all of her work online, but she told me that any of the kids in pre-med or any of the kids that need to have lab classes are going to be in school. So they're going to have to go there, live there, and do that kind of thing. So it's going to change and vary for everybody. and we're going to have to find ways to make this work. So what's the impact on families? So one of the big impacts is that parents became teachers. Well, I can tell you from our history of working at LearningWorks that parents don't always love to be teachers. The original model that we had with LearningWorks for Kids was that we were going to show parents how to use popular technologies to help their kids build executive functioning skills. We would help the parents identify their executive functioning difficulties. From there, we would then determine what kinds of concerns the kids had, target a number of games and apps that would help the kids, and then we gave parents extensive tools to help their kids. Sometimes they'd have videos, they would have lengthy descriptions of the skills to talk about with the kids, talking points, activities that could practice those skills in the real world. In other words, how could they take what their kids were doing in games and make them into real world skills? Well, what we found is the parents really didn't love doing that stuff. And I think for the most part, parents really don't want to be teachers. I mean, they don't know what to do. I mean, I was talking to some friends who were telling me about how they see parents talking to themselves all the time now. They're kind of walking around, they don't know what to do. And somebody actually said to one of these parents, "What are you doing? You're talking to yourself." I said, "No, I'm having a parent-teacher conference." This is what they're doing. They're so busy doing both of those things. And for many of these parents, they're wearing multiple hats, especially if they're working at home. So our thinking is that we really need to think about how can we help these families, how can we help move them forward in terms of what they're going to do. So what we're doing is we have developed a program called LearningWorks for Kids Live. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through this with you pretty quickly. I'm going to go through a series of the slides that we use. Essentially what LearningWorks Live is a small group online executive functioning training program for kids that uses popular video games as a teaching tool. We don't really think that kids are going to play Minecraft or Fortnite Creative or Roblox and all of a sudden have great executive functioning skills. They're not going to all of a sudden develop time management skills or organizational skills, even though many of these games use those skills in the game. They truly do. If you ever watch a kid play any of these types of games, especially the sandbox games like Minecraft and Roblox and Fortnite Creative, they can do so many things that they're building these kinds of skills, or at least they're practicing those skills. Our whole job at LearningWorks for Kids is to make that game-based learning into real-world skills. So we use a variety of strategic teaching principles. We use some strategies such as previewing what we're doing, partnering with the kids. We use a variety of questioning types of tools, all these kinds of methods to kind of get kids to start thinking about the skills they're using in the game, and then how to kind of from there kind of practice those skills into the real world. When we talk about our LearningWorks for Kids programs, we like to talk about them as being 80% fun, 20% learning. We're hoping that 20% of the time that we're spending learning really results in 80% learning. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to make gameplay digitally nutritious. There's a lot to be learned in these games, but applying it to the real world is not so easy. On the other hand, it's such a fertile ground for teaching. When you watch kids play video games, especially these games that they love, they are so attentive. People talk about them being in the flow, they're just totally engaged. They're persistent. They're playing, which is how kids learn. So our objective is to kind of use that play and make it into ways to have these kids learn. The key thing is, how do we help that gameplay become real world skills? And we focus so much on generalization. So what I'm going to do is just sort of kind of glide through these slides and show you some of the things we do. So when kids come to our LearningWorks for Kids Live classes, and this is the model that could work in many ways, where we're actually hoping that we're going to be able to offer this to clinicians in schools very shortly as well, so they can do the same thing. There's a lot of slides here. The number of slides here is far more than we use in any single session for the kids, because most of the time we're actually doing things with the kids is we're playing games, and our teachers are talking with them about the skills they're using while they're playing the game. We're pointing out those skills. We're helping the kids recognize those skills that they used in the game. And we have a variety of talking points that helps them to see how they could use those skills in the real world. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the slides. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to show you Minecraft and the gameplay that we do, but these are the slides that might precede or come after our gameplay. as I said, more than you would normally see. So these slides here basically are, we tell them a little bit about the teacher. So each of our teachers are, by definition, they're gamers. They like playing games, and they know about executive functions. We've trained them in that. They're really, all of them are either kids who have graduated from universities with psychology majors or educational majors, but they love gaming. So we usually go through a little bit of a course overview. We give them so we can preview what we're going to do with the kids. And we have to be very careful with kids who come to play games with us, because they want to play the games already. They don't want to sit around and wait for this to happen. They want to play the game. So we have a variety of things. And when we have multi-session classes where we have repeated, same kids come in for a number of classes, we also give homework to them. And most of the time the homework is go play this game and take a screenshot of when you use that skill we were talking about in the game. Parents will oftentimes have applied opportunities. So they'll have what we call a do together with the kid, where the parent actually has to practice that skill in the real world and kind of talk about the game that the kid played. So that we're trying to get the parents to be more involved to actually get these skills practiced. Typically, we're gonna set goals for the kids so that they know we're gonna do so. In this particular one, we want to teach the kids about organization. So we tell them a little bit about organization. And we got the slides up there. We glide through these slides with the kids as well. We've developed some things like this is a video of what do we mean by organization, how is it used in video games. So the kids will watch this. Other times they might watch the teacher or another individual using the skill while playing the game itself. We talk a little bit about what good organizational skills are. We also make sure that they know what bad organizational skills are. Sometimes the best way to get to these kids is to show them some funny stuff. We have some of our slideshows have pictures of total disaster areas of kids' rooms and total disorganization. Kids get a laugh out of it. So we can kind of get them to laugh and think about this stuff. So then what we do is we play. So what I'm going to do is show you sort of the core piece of what we do though. So we play with the kids, but the other thing that we do is we have a 3-step method. And this is a very simple method that can be applied much to many other things beyond the games that we're talking about that can help with generalization. So one of the difficulties with learning from games, learning from the classroom, actually, for that matter, learning in psychotherapy, is how do you take what you've learned in that one place and apply it to another? In other words, how do you transfer or generalize it? And in particular, if we get into the details of it, far transfer, something that's not similar to something else, is even more difficult. So we work very hard using a variety of techniques to make this happen. And the steps we talk about 3 steps. We talk about detect, reflect, connect. Detect is to be able to identify and recognize the skill. And we really work on helping the kids do that while they're playing the games and things like that. The reflect step is a metacognitive step. And when you look at all of the data on how do kids learn best, metacognition is one of the core principles of learning, and especially of generalization, of being able to go from one place to another. You've got to be able to think about it. You've got to be able to look at what-if situations, look at analogies, look at metaphors, to help you to be able to apply it someplace else. And then the last part is to connect. How can you apply what you've learned in something to the real world? So this is what we do. We teach kids how they can do that. We give them places that they can do that. We ask them questions about how could they apply this to the real world. So the remainder of the slides are simply to kind of show you a little bit more about examples of how we would do this. These are, again, just slides that we're using to show the kids. As I told you, we give homework, and the homework is for the kids is the best homework they've ever gotten. Go play Minecraft for an hour. You tell your parents that's your homework. You gotta go play Minecraft for an hour. But you gotta pay attention to when you use planning, and you gotta share a screen that shows us when you use planning and describe that to us. Parents, like I said, get a kind of a do together kind of thing, and they get some learning materials as well, and then they do the play together piece with their kids. So next thing I want to do is tell you where we're doing this stuff, and part of why I'm sharing this with you is that we just found OUTSCHOOL to be pretty incredible as a place to do this with kids. So we had been doing some of these kinds of LearningWorks for Kids live programs on our own website. And we could kind of do it as we wanted, but there's a lot of difficulties in sort of making it happen. I mean, in terms of just in terms of the simple signups and getting everybody on. We were using Zoom and doing all those kinds of things before COVID-19, but we found that it wasn't so great for that. We decided we would start to use OUTSCHOOL, and when I went there, it was like, oh my God, look at this place. And again, when it comes to looking at what can we do with COVID-19 and what's a good model for teaching for this time of COVID-19, OUTSCHOOL has it. I mean, right now they have about 15,000 live classes, camps. You can see some of the stuff here. They use a lot of those tools that make remote learning work. For example, the teachers know the technology. So teachers who are on there have practiced with the technology, so they know what to do with it. They have small groups. Another thing that we know from the research, it says, how are you going to teach remotely best? So for example, there's some really great thinking about teaching in small tutorial groups, 5, 6 kids at a time. That's exactly what happens on OUTSCHOOL. The teachers often can take some time to do some one-on-one help for kids. Now, obviously, this varies on the teachers. If there's 15,000 live classes, I don't know how many teachers there are at this point, but I'm sure there's at least 2,000 or 3,000 teachers. Kids can choose classes that they like. The classes are far more interactive. And the other thing that I think has been really great about OUTSCHOOL is that a lot of the families there have kids who struggle with the traditional classes, who struggle with just a regular traditional class, never mind being in a class that's remote or distant learning, where they can kind of feel lost. So it's really suited for kids with ADHD, for anxiety disorders. Some of the kids with anxiety disorders can do pretty well once they get to know a teacher and start talking to kids, to others. So that's kind of what I got. If you'd like some more information about what we're doing, this slide will have all that information about what we're doing. One of the things that I think that we can learn from the programs that we're doing right now is that kids who are in remote and distance learning, they need to have those executive functioning skills. So any way that we can teach them, ours is only one method of doing that, but I think that that's almost going to be part of what all schools start to do with their kids if they're going to be working remotely. Because if kids can't organize themselves, if they can't get started on tasks, if they can't manage their time, it can be a nightmare. And it was a nightmare in the spring of 2020. So teaching those executive functioning skills can be really helpful. Programs like OUTSCHOOL can give teachers some great strategies about how to reach kids and make it work. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Randy. Really appreciate that. Obviously, when we get to the Q&A, I want to talk more about the platform you designed and what you found out about Zoom versus the platform that you had, but really interesting presentation. Thank you. So I want to turn it over now to Dr. Rupa Phillips, and she's going to be speaking both about telehealth and then multicultural behavior. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Lynn. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And thank you, Dr. Randy. As I heard you, I was just wondering whether I could race back my times when I could start school and go back and enjoy all the opportunities that you're actually putting forth now. My son would really enjoy what is being offered right now. And so really thank you for that. So I have been engaged with telepsychology and distance mental health services for the past decade. Although the possibilities for in-person services was possible, the reach for many individuals necessitated the virtual engagement to offer my services. And so talking about the virtual platform meant serving individuals of different ethnicities, nationalities, religions, economic backgrounds, and family backgrounds as well, educational differences, the physical characteristics. With this as my background, I have learned and still learning the essential aspects of multiculture with the use of telepsychological services. I'm based in India, South India. And when I was moved to North India because of my husband's work, it took us to different places and countries. And so went to North India and I thought I was in another country altogether. because the culture in South India is so different from that in North. And I was exposed to a variety of culture in the city that I was in North India. Then moved to, before that had gone to Malaysia, and then stayed in Germany because of my husband's work again, and then for about 4 years in US at Kentucky. So that required me to be continuing to keep in touch with my clients from different countries, from different places and cities. And that gave this exposure for me. And I enjoyed working with the different cultures, I should say. So what is the new normal that we have right now? Recent events of COVID-19 and the related lockdown has skyrocketed the need for online services. These unprecedented times have led to unprecedented adaptation by people to do all their transactions online. More than ever, we are in times that demand us to move away from our current practice of the same location services to offering online services in order to serve our clients and reach out to them in spite of the constraints in the current situation, such as the lockdown and the social distancing. Although I mentioned the current situation demands telepsychology as a response to COVID, it is important to note that the distance mental health services have been prevalent for more than 2 decades. We will discuss this in detail to understand its origin and also the aspect of multicultural in the context of telehealth. This form of therapy is highly accessible to people around the globe to gain access to the basic mental health services. So it also is applicable when a preferred or more experienced counselor is not in the same vicinity as that of the client. Similar to that of in-person consultations, we need to be mindful of the multicultural aspects while using the telehealth mode. So what is telepsychology and what are its origins? Research regarding distance psychological services goes back many decades. The psychologists sought to use email correspondence, the telephonic conversations to assist clients who could not meet in person, which has been since the start of about 20th century. In past therapy that was administered electronically would be referred to many terminologies, such as teletherapy, e-therapy, cyber counseling, and many more. For this panel discussion, we will stay with the telehealth and telepsychological words and want to look at how we are able to access this for individuals with medical mobility disabilities. So benefits include more flexible scheduling, access to therapy in their native languages, and several other advantages. So while we're looking at this, understanding the various types of telepsychological services is essential, both to the consumer and the practitioners as well who are considering telehealth. So for those who are interested in doing research in this area, which is very critical at this moment, it is important to consider research both from the consumer side and the practitioner side. The telehealth word, the provision of medical care services using technological modalities in lieu of or in addition to traditional face-to-face methods. So what about telepsychology? The provision of behavioral or mental health care services using technology modalities in addition to the traditional face-to-face methods. And so this can be using the phone, the diagnostic interviewing via telephone conferencing, and several platforms that's helping both the synchronous service provisions and the asynchronous. So while we're looking at media psychology, we have several telepsychologists who are using the provision of videos as well as games and interactive modes in having to use that in the therapy and during the service of those times in order to work with their clients. And it has worked so beautifully. So what are the types of technology that are used for telehealth and psychology? We want to keep in mind, first of all, the informed consent and all of that as per the guidelines that APA outlines for a psychologist. And not only in US, United States, we're also considering all across the globe. Each state, each country have their own rules, and so having to stick to it. But above everything, the HIPAA compliant software is essential for a telepsychologist to keep in mind. And these are outlined beautifully by the Medicine and Behavioral Health organization, and they provide several workshops and trainings and certifications. So what are the types of why would I want to use telepsychology? That's something that every telepsychologist could put on their platform to help their clients or the consumers be aware of what is the benefit for them. So the increased access to therapy for individuals with physical or medical mobility disabilities, and even increased access to disability specialists regardless of the geographic area. And so if we're talking of an therapist who is in another country or in another city, but they don't have the language group of those in their specialized geographical area, this is so beautiful to reach beyond boundaries. And let's look at a cultural point. What is the advantage of individuals who have a stigma to therapy itself and have a difficulty like agoraphobia? They're unable to step out of their rooms, out of their offices. But when it comes to telepsychology, it is so helpful for such individuals to stay in their safe zones and connect and take professional help. And there is also the advantage of flexible scheduling. So keeping that in mind, we can also look at other clients appreciate the privacy of meeting virtually from their own homes and offices. Even the younger generation, this is very natural for them, using the virtual media. So offering guidance to the psychologists who offer technological services is the goal of APA's guidelines for the practice of telepsychology. So that will not be elaborated right now, but then I would like to just add in before I move to multicultural aspects about a survey. So in a survey of 1,500 adults conducted by Nielsen on behalf of Accenture in 2016, more than 2/3 of the respondents were at least somewhat interested in receiving healthcare virtually. But when it came to mental health, 53% said they would probably or definitely try virtual counseling or therapy. So while 50% said the same for virtual group therapy as well. So yet only 21% had received any healthcare virtually. But now I'm sure that statistics will show a lot more difference on how everything is 100% virtual professional services from psychologists and even the counselors as well. So I would like to also mention about the effectiveness. In a study conducted by Cohen and Kerr, one of the first studies done on the topic of effectiveness, online effectiveness, they measured the difference between a computer-mediated therapy service and a face-to-face counseling service. It was measured on the basis of anxiety that was faced by the client with the therapist. And the researchers also were able to collate data from the participants of the study on the rating given to the therapist. There were several criteria. The first one was expertness, attractiveness, and then trustworthiness. What was noticed was that there were no functional differences between the two groups. Both the groups had the same decrease in anxiety symptoms. So it is helpful for all of us to explore telepsychology and what it offers when we are considering having to reach out to the clients who are in need. So let's move on to the multicultural aspects. When I'm thinking of the multicultural aspects, I'm thinking of, aren't we all aware that we have been trained and we have been keeping in mind the multicultural aspects even while we were working with our clients in person? So that is the cross-cultural humility and the cultural competence that I'd like to bring in. Just those two words, for keeping in mind for this panel discussion. The multicultural competencies is a ubiquitous model in mental health which can be addressed with the three main domains. So the psychologist's knowledge about different cultures and cultural perspectives is unnecessary. And then we look at the skills to utilize culturally appropriate approaches. So the KSA, that is the knowledge, skills, and awareness that all of us are familiar with, needs to be kept in mind even when we are considering working with different cultures. So the psychologist's awareness of their own and their client's culture heritage and the influence of culture on attitudes, the beliefs, and the experiences need to be kept in mind. So let's look at the cross-cultural humility versus the competence. The two domains that Shaw actually speaks about is not cultural competencies anymore, but talks about multicultural orientation. So how is it that we can be oriented to who and where our clients are coming from? So it's by even just being humble enough to stay in that place saying, I don't know who you are and where you are coming from. I'd like to know more about it. So the client's perception of the counselors or the therapist level of cultural humility is essential. So the degree to which the psychologist addresses the culture and cultural opportunities in the session is vital. So these are the two domains on the multicultural orientation. Let us see what Joshua Hook and his colleagues note on the cultural humility. The cultural humility refers to the psychologist's ability to maintain an interpersonal stance that is other-oriented or open to the others in relation to the aspects of cultural identity and, most important, to the client. So the cultural humility contains intrapersonal and interpersonal dimensions. So when we are staying with these words, I'd like us to just look at how much do I know a culture and who are the ones who are my neighbors, who are the ones who are my clients that are of a different culture. Have I been open enough to ask them about their culture and what it means to be working with a therapist or a psychologist of a different culture? So the intrapersonally cultural humility encompasses the psychologist's openness to accept their own cultural identities as well, and experiences that will limit the perspective and awareness in understanding the cultural experiences of others. And so the interpersonal dimension of the cultural humility involves the other orientation, the other in quotes, the other oriented stance that includes openness, respect, consideration, humility, and interest regarding the client's cultural identity and experiences. Sometimes what I've observed when I supervise is that individuals are so busy in helping them out, but not interested enough to know the cultural components of what's causing them to be where they are. Our interest as a psychologist about their culture and seeing how that actually plays a role in where our clients are help individuals to be telepsychologist with cultural humility versus cultural competence. We can learn and have a knowledge of a lot about different cultures. We can get orientation from several of it, but then it's important for us to stay focused. I wouldn't run through all the slides here, but I would just want to leave this here for all of you, and then if required, you could definitely have this information sent to you or put up, but want to close with saying that the reach through telepsychology is beyond boundaries. It's genuinely helping individuals who do not have the reach to you as an expert to be able to get that support from you. So reach out, be there, and whether you're a researcher, a practitioner, or whoever, I'm sure that you will do much better in this time and grabbing the opportunity of the season. Over to you, Dr. Jerry Lynn.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Dr. Phillips. Really interesting talk. And to really critical piece is the one about multicultural aspects, as well as this new normal that we have, reaching out and providing therapy online, and the idea of, well, it was available before, the desperate need now to be able to do that. So thank you, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions when you're done. But now I would really like to welcome Dr. Wasim Ahmed and for his presentation. Thank you, Wasim.
Yeah, so thank you very much. It's really interesting presentations. And I'm going to talk about COVID-19, the pandemic, and specifically about the social media activities around it, and the kind of occurrence of fake news and misinformation, and how our team has been trying to understand how people have been sharing fake news, methods to detect it using social computing methods, and potential strategies to try and kind of combat misinformation around COVID-19. One of the most popular conspiracy theories in the UK and in Europe has been around the link between COVID-19 and 5G. So there's some people on social media trying to link the mobile communications network 5G to the outbreak of COVID-19. So it started off kind of small scale conspiracy, but then started to gain traction on social media. And it led to real world consequences. So over 20 mobile phone masts were vandalized in the United Kingdom and across Europe as well. And telecom workers were kind of attacked and received a lot of kind of abuse in person as well. And even a hospital in the United Kingdom, the mobile network antenna was also vandalized. So it was a kind of serious conspiracy theory kind of spreading on social media. And my area is kind of social media research, and in the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen a lot of new kind of social media platforms emerge and become very popular. So another recent platform is TikTok. A lot of people are kind of using it. And we've also seen that more and more people are using social media platforms around the world. As more people kind of connect to the internet, the amount of people on social media is also increasing. So this organization, We Are Social, has been doing these surveys every year to kind of estimate the usage of different social media platforms. And each year they're finding that more and more people are kind of logging in and using them. And also during the pandemic, during the lockdown periods, all of these different social media companies had seen an increase in usage, particularly Twitter, for example. It saw a boost in the amount of people that were using it. And when we look at the popular social media platforms, so this was from kind of January 2020 of this year, their million monthly active users has probably increased as people were kind of forced to stay home. They started to log online more. So any potential misinformation and conspiracy theories were kind of more visible during this time as more people were kind of logging in and seeing the different content. So our focus has been analyzing different conspiracy theories. But for this talk, I'm focusing just on getting some understanding of why and how people were sharing this conspiracy about 5G and COVID-19, specifically on Twitter. So we were using the method of social network analysis, and it's a process of investigating social structures through the use of network and graph theories. So we wanted to understand who was spreading it, what the network looked like, and how we can kind of combat that in the future. So rather than develop our own kind of tool or package to do the analysis, we used a popular tool, NodeXL, which is popular among social scientists. It doesn't require any kind of programming knowledge. Anyone can use this to kind of retrieve and analyze data. And it's a kind of Microsoft Excel plugin. And we noticed it had been used in previous research, so to kind of study Blackboard discussion boards personal email networks, Wikipedia, and so forth. So we kind of selected this tool. And what it allows us to do is retrieve data from Twitter related to this conspiracy theory, and then cluster the discussion into different groups and break down each Twitter user as a node, as a kind of small circle, and represent connections between them as edges. So if one user retrieved a lot of retweets, the arrows would kind of point in and we could see who is kind of influential. So we used kind of social network analysis to look at the network and try and highlight who was most influential. And NodeXL has published a guidance on what social media clusters and topics might look like. So when we're analyzing Twitter data sets, we can actually look at previous research. And it says there's kind of 6 main types of network shapes and structures we might find on social media and Twitter. So one of them is the broadcast network shape. We might see kind of popular accounts sharing conspiracies or sharing information, and a lot of people kind of retweet them. We might also see polarized crowds where we have 2 opposing views on social media, but the users don't actually speak to each other. They're just in their own kind of groups, and there's not much interaction between them. They just tweet about various topics. And other topics will just incur a kind of burst of tweets, people giving their opinions. So we kind of use this previous framework and retrieve data specifically on COVID-19. And if anyone's interested in learning more about kind of network shapes and analyzing social media data, there's a lot of videos on YouTube from the Social Media Research Foundation. And there's also a paper on the Pew Internet Research project looking at how you can map Twitter topics and what these kind of different clusters and shapes mean. So for this specific conspiracy, we use the measure of betweenness centrality to kind of detect important people in the network. So if we wanted to highlight who the most important person was kind of sharing the conspiracy, we were interested in finding users who kind of acted as bridges between other users. So betweenness centrality doesn't look at the amount of followers a user might have. It looks at who kind of bridged different connections and who was able to spread the message or conspiracy theories further because of their location in the network. So who was kind of prominent in spreading it. So this is what NodeXL kind of desktop version looks like. It's a plugin for Excel. You can retrieve tweets and data and kind of visualize them for insight. So our study used this tool to kind of retrieve the data. So we published in the Journal of Medical Internet Research. So the paper was titled COVID-19 and the 5G Conspiracy Theory, a Social Network Analysis of Twitter Data. So this network graph shows the discussion clustered into a number of different groups, and each of the groups are labeled. So we have group 1, group 2, group 3, and 4, and onwards. And these different groups contain influential accounts. So we can see that the first group was what we call an isolates group, where people just kind of shared the conspiracy theory in large numbers, but didn't mention one another. We also found some interesting groups. So if we look at group 4, labeled activism account, so we managed to trace the existence of a specific account that was set up just to kind of spread the conspiracy theory. So it was had a user handle 5G COVID, and it managed to send out in a 7-day time period around 380 tweets. And if you can see, it's the 4th largest group in the entire network. So it had quite a lot of reach. It managed to produce a lot of discussion on Twitter, and it had a lot of links to other networks as well. Some of the other groups also told us that there was a lot of retweeting occurring as well. So people kind of tweet the conspiracy, and other people will come in and kind of retweet it with a lot of frequency. So this is the ranking of influential users. We found that a lot of citizens, ordinary people were kind of sharing the conspiracy, becoming influential, and it kind of spread on Twitter. The 5G and COVID-19 dedicated account was the kind of 5th most influential overall. Eventually, Twitter shut down this account, but before they did so, it sent out a lot of tweets. We also found that there were people who were influential in the network, but they weren't actually tweeting them themselves. So YouTube was a popular information source. So a lot of people replied and shared YouTube videos and mentioned YouTube. The president of the United States as well was very popular at this time. A lot of people were mentioning and replying to tweets. And so he also kind of became influential in the network as well. We also looked at influential web sources as well. So who's actually sharing this type of information, what websites are popular. So we found a fake news website, InfoWars, which is kind of popular on misinformation topics. It came up as being very popular. And they looked at, it shared content supposedly showing scientists confirming that 5G weakens the immune system. There was another website which sold protection for electromagnetism waves, so kind of body wear and headgear and so forth. So they had a commercial interest in the conspiracy theory that people believed it, people would kind of buy their equipment and so forth. So we also saw that appear as a popular information source as well. So that was shared quite a bit. So they were sharing the links and so forth. We also found a number of other websites trying to kind of link the two together as well. When we analyzed the tweets, so we retrieved 7 days worth of tweets, processed those in Node Excel. We analyzed them to see the percentage of people who actually believe the conspiracy theory and how many were just kind of making fun of it, not actually believing it. So we found that only 34% of tweets sampled, those users believe the conspiracy, shared it, and said they are linked. 33% of users just expressed kind of a general tweet linking to the hashtag that was kind of not really related to it. But there were a lot of tweets that were humorous and those kind of arguing against the conspiracy. Because there was an influx of a large amount of humorous content, this raised the profile of the conspiracy and it started to begin to trend on Twitter. So it became a trending topic because it received so much attention. So the people trying to mock the conspiracy inadvertently kind of raised it to become a trending topic. We also found some worrying tweets as well. So people were posting damage towards the 5G phone mast. So people were posting videos and saying, look what's happened in this particular region. And people were getting happy and saying, make sure you kind of smash those masts up. So that was a kind of anonymized tweet. We also saw people saying, hope we can see more go down as well. And people were asking what should be done with the other kind of 5G phone masts as well. In terms of popular domains, YouTube came up quite a bit. So people link to potential videos that show or claim to show scientists who are talking about the link, and those become really popular as well. We also found that the InfoWars website, many different news articles were kind of shared from that information source. We also found that there was a specific website set up as well to try and show the link between the two. So we came up with some recommendations on how to kind of combat misinformation and fake news. So one of the methods was to be able to kind of detect it rapidly. So to have tools in place to be able to detect it very quickly, and then to eliminate the accounts that are clearly kind of spreading a conspiracy theory related methods. So we found that this specific dedicated Twitter account set up to spread the conspiracy managed to contact at least 408 other Twitter users. So they mentioned those. And that was kind of 303 tweets that they sent. So if this was taken down quicker, that group 4 I showed earlier would be smaller, so the network wouldn't have been as large. So they could have removed that. Users also could have used the reporting features on Twitter and so forth to kind of stop the sharing of misinformation. So rather than reply, just kind of report the content. And a final set of recommendations was to try and seek the help of influential authorities and bodies to try and fight misinformation. As if you use kind of powerful accounts, you can try and mitigate the kind of spread of it, and also to kind of find out and understand the context of why people are kind of sharing this fake news. So that's everything from me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. Really fascinating work. I have a few students that are working on their dissertations in the conspiracy theory, and I know if they're not on right now that they're going to want to watch this recording because I find that your recommendations are quite powerful. So to the broader audience, and we'll have Dr. Kulman and Dr. Phillips also put their cameras back on. Like to open it up to Q&A, but let's start. I do want to ask Dr. Kulman, and I alluded to this when you finished, is that, you know, we're all in Zoom right now, and it's really I think at least for us, we were already teaching in Zoom. And we were already holding a lot of our meetings in Zoom, so it was an easy segue. But then when it came time to be able to present this conference, because our conference originally was supposed to be in person, and having to make that shift, it was a real challenge because there's some really good things about Zoom. One of them, our familiarity, right? But there's already some research out there about the fatigue that we get from that, including that it's not natural for us to look at big heads for long periods of time. So I'm just I'd love to hear a little bit more details about, you know, sort of what informed your alternative model and what maybe we can take away as far as being able to engage better.
So the model was one for us that was not so much about COVID as much about kids who love technology. So we're just trying to use this time when they're on screens in a more effective way for them. I mean, part of what we've been doing for many years is saying, you know what, kids like to be on screens. Oftentimes when I do these kinds of discussions, or especially when I'm working with parents, I'll talk all about how we can use screens to help kids. And all the questions at the end for me are, how do we keep kids off screens? So we're in a situation now where kids are spending an awful lot of time on screen. I actually have developed this whole concept of what I call a healthy play diet. How can kids, in fact, for that matter, adults, because that now we need it more than ever, have a healthy play diet where some of our time is spent on screens, but we're getting outside, we're doing things with other people. Even if it's this way, we're pursuing other hobbies and activities, that we're doing other things. How can we have a balance of that? So our thing wasn't so much, oh, let's jump into the screens. We were saying, how can we use those screens in a healthier way that where the kids, if they're going to be there, they can get something from it. So we're trying to communicate to parents, to educators, and clinicians, hey, people are on screens, how are you going to do that? We're even actually thinking a little bit about, I'm doing some of my neuropsychological testing on screens. So some of it's online now. And that was a very difficult transition to do. Although when I went back into the office a couple of weeks ago, that was probably even a more difficult transition, because now I wasn't doing psychological testing with screens, I was doing with a mask. And the kids had masks on, and their eyes made me think that they were frightened and scared, and communicating was far more difficult. And so, you know, there have been a lot of questions about, you know, how valid is doing using technology for doing evaluations? How valid is doing that kind of thing as well? So I guess what I'm trying to say in general is that I think that we're on screens right now. We're going to be on screens. How do we use this most effectively? And how do we recognize that we need to find time to do other things? And I think that's really important for all of us as adults and as parents and clinicians and for kids.
You know what? I think that, that's so true. And that's what I'm hearing in all of your talks too, though, that, you know, hey, it's here and we don't know if it's ever going to go away, but it's, you know, it's not I mean, before we argued whether we should be, now it's necessary. So what are the good tools and what are the best practices we can use to make it healthy? I mean, all of you guys had some great comments like Randy, it was digitally delicious. I love that. So so that really leads me into a question for you, Dr. Phillips. And with the team of students, we were noticing a generational difference in how people felt like they could engage digitally. And what was actually kind of interesting about this was we expected Gen Z to be the ones that were the most comfortable starting new relationships online. Now, obviously, we need to follow up study and to look at additional items. But what came up was that as long as they had some in-person touch base, started the relationship in person, they were fine with developing and having a very robust and maintaining that relationship online. But without that initial touch point, they were wary of doing it, which really points back to a lot of old research before we had all the, you know, smartphones and things like that. So I'm just curious in your research and in your experience, whether you're seeing any difference, and actually to all three of you, but to start with Dr. Phillips.
Yes. So I would just want to say that in my experience, I would suggest to all of my supervisees while they were working and saying that they're having this difficulty, to connect with them on that first point of connect, and which we would most commonly known as the rapport building, to look at something more informal. And so even if it means to be picking up different pictures and saying, can you show me a video that's actually talking about your emotion right now? And to use those connections rather than having to be more narrative or the talk therapy kinds, and then connecting with a picture or show me a picture. And so they are sharing the screen with you. And so how to connect with the Gen Z requires on the virtual platform, it requires a skill to move away from the face-to-face or the in-person or the same location one, to change our skills and the mode of connecting with them. And I would say that they definitely like that first point contact, and that first point contact can be essentially done in different ways, in creative ways and innovative ways, like how we are doing our online training. In the similar way, we can do the same for telepsychology as well. Thank you for the question.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I'd love to hear what Dr. Kulman or Dr. Ed have to say about that.
I'll go. I work primarily with kids. So one of the things that we were doing is we were doing our essentially our diagnostic intake, our first interview with kids and families online. And that struck me as kind of an unusual way to meet people. I struggled with that initially, until a couple of kids helped me to learn what to do. So, part of what I do with kids is I ask them, tell me a little about yourself. What do you like to do? I mean, because we're talking about all the problems and the parents telling them. I always want to help the kids. I want to hear about the kids' strengths, what they love, what they like to do. And so I said, well, what do you like to do? And so the kids are at home. So they said, I like to play with this. So I said, can you go get that? So they would bring their toys. And these are younger kids, but even some older kids, even some preteens, if you will, would show me something. They might show me a book they're reading, but they would actually go, it's kind of show and tell.
Mm-hmm.
And if I really open things up, the parents would smile, they would say, oh, show Dr. Kulman this and this. And all of a sudden, I felt like I was kind of visiting in their home. And I would sometimes pick up I won't do this to all you guys, but I'd pick up my screen and say, look at my office. And I have a lot of plants in here, and I'd show them this and that and some other kinds of things. And that was a way to sort of open doors. And I found, especially with kids, that worked pretty well.
You know, it's so funny that you said that. First of all, I think that's great. But ironically, as we were preparing this morning for the keynote, she was talking about how she had to set up her desk for the keynote to go well, you know, a screen here, basically her version of a teleprompter and stuff. And so she took a screenshot of it and sent it all to us. So we were doing the same thing even this morning with adults before the conference started. So really, yeah, really interesting. And Dr. Anna, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Hi, sorry, I was in mute. So I've got a question in the chat I've seen about who we could use as a kind of authority figure for the kind of countering misinformation. So in our study, what we recommended was to not use government accounts to kind of counteract misinformation, because we saw that they're kind of distrusted, and the conspiracy theory people won't actually trust the accounts. They might get kind of drawn out. So what we were recommending was to use influencers, kind of popular culture figures, kind of celebrities or other people who are already kind of engaging with the government, and to use those types of accounts to kind of share information across different platforms, rather than kind of draw upon any kind of official government-based accounts.
Thank you. I have another question for you that's come up, and that's, is there any way to study misinformation on other social platforms such as WhatsApp or Facebook?
Yeah, so that's a good question as well. So there's one tool known as CrowdTangle that has access to kind of Facebook public posts and data. But one of the challenges with the other platforms, and why people research Twitter a lot more, is because with Twitter you can get access to kind of all of the data. So they'll actually give you a subsample of all of the data, and anyone with an internet connection can kind of log onto the platform, retrieve data, and analyze it for kind of research or for detecting misinformation. But with some of these other platforms, things like Facebook and WhatsApp, you can only get access to kind of public groups and pages. It can be difficult to get access to the kind of inside of it. So it's tricky to know how much misinformation is on those platforms, and to try and quantify it can be a bit tricky.
Thank you. Wow, that's really interesting. Elizabeth, do you see a few more questions coming in the queue?
Sure. Let's see. Back to Dr. Phillips. That concept of cultural humility is wonderful and very timely, as you noted and Jerry Lynn mentioned. What is, are there some good resources to help people understand how to ask questions or how to learn more and express the concept of cultural humility?
A very good question. Thank you. Since I didn't have the time, and this is good that the question came up, so during the session, suggestions by the multicultural orientation theory suggest that we include acknowledging the cultural differences early on in the therapy itself. So in the consent form, when we have taken down the details about which ethnic group they are from, then acknowledge that, hey, you know what, I'm an Asian and you are Caucasian or whatever, and then be able to ask, how does that, what is that for you like? And then discuss it rather than having to not attend to it. So acknowledging it, talking about it is the most important point in the multicultural orientation. And then to also acknowledge the biases that we have about various cultures. So as a telepsychologist, you just write down the different biases that you have towards different cultures, and then look back from where did you get that. It could be biases, microaggressions that occur, and then once you have a good awareness of that, you are able to look at it and say, how am I as a psychologist be able to address it differently now? And keep them aside. So one is the awareness, then acknowledging this, then develop a culture of feedback. So at the end of the first session, at the end of the second session, uh, allow yourself to ask them, as a telepsychologist, how did you feel? Was there any cultural difficulties that came up? Get feedback from the clients during therapy, before, and help them to know that you're very open to asking and they having to let you know. And that will help us serve different cultures in a better way. So the feedback and building that rapport, having to see, is there anything, any discomfort that you have in various cultures that you've met from my culture as a therapist that you are having some apprehensions about, being open to talk to them about it, and then letting them help you be more informed will definitely be some small tips for the practical use of it.
I mean, I'm hearing this sort of, that sounds so powerful, and I'm hearing this continually being said by all of you, and having that open line of conversation as you're moving through it. There's a great question about Node XL, which I actually was kind of curious about when you were showing that, because I said I have several students that are looking at conspiracy theory. So Dr. Emmett, I don't know if you can see it in there, but there's a question about Node XL. For a research psychologist who has very little experience or affinity for computer programming, what is the best way to start to learn how to use it for social media network analysis? And this would be in supporting of extending our research in social behavior modeling. Oops, you're on mute.
So, yeah, so that's a really good question. So there's a couple of kind of videos on YouTube that'll give you a kind of general introduction. There's also a book. I can send the link. Send the link now. It's titled "Analyzing Social Media Networks with Node XL: Insights from a Connected World." So that's a really useful, in-depth book. It starts with no prior knowledge, so you can have no knowledge of using Node XL, and it goes through kind of simple steps and guides you through different activities and tasks. And if you work yourself through that book, hopefully you will get the knowledge needed to retrieve, manipulate data, and the types of insights you can find as well. So it's recently in its second edition. So it'd be worth kind of having a read of that book, and then also looking at kind of YouTube videos as well, where academics have created kind of how-to guides and step-by-step instructions.
Excellent. Well, the attendees can't see it, so what we'll do, I saved the link, and we'll have it posted on the website along with the recording of this, because I'm sure there's other people that'll be watching the recording. We're out of time now. I wanted to just briefly see if each one of you had any last statements that you wanted to say before we leave. We'll start with Dr. Phillips. Nothing like putting you on the spot.
Yes, I love it. And just want to say thank you to all the practitioners and the researchers who are interested in telehealth. Just go there and get it. It is the right time, and we are in the right place, and we have the opportunities with these symposiums and the universities helping and supporting us through these. So go and enjoy the season, and all the best to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Kulman.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I enjoyed this a lot, and enjoyed the other conversations and presentations. The one lesson that I think is important for all of us to have is that we need to adapt, that we need to be flexible, we need to, and how we kind of go about doing that in terms of our work, our families, our friends, our social relationships, all these kinds of things, and using technology as part of that, I think, is important. I think that those of us who are in media psychology are seeing it change before our very eyes, and I think we have to sort of be able to go with it and like I said, be flexible with it and see what works, and not be overly critical of something if it doesn't work at first, and see if we can make it work better.
Excellent, thank you. And Dr. Emmett.
So I just wanted to say thanks for having me on the panel, and for everyone attending. And just kind of update on future work we're doing around kind of misinformation. We're also looking at another conspiracy, the kind of firm your hospital conspiracy theory hashtag. So we might have some kind of outputs related to that in a couple of months as well, if anyone's interested in looking at our methodology kind of applied to a different context.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you all. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all of the participants for joining us today. And there's some great more presentations and a discussion hour, I believe, at 2:45 Pacific that I don't think you want to miss. All right. Thank you.